Mario, Sonic the Hedgehog, two of gaming's most recognizable heroes finally in a game together. It is a battle of strength and wit. Who will win? Who will come out victorious? Who? Wait a minute.
Whoa! No! This is not a good power up! In 1992, Factor 5 was working on development kits for the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. In addition, they were developing Turrican games for both consoles. Super Turrican and Mega Turrican started development at around the same time, and yes, they were totally different games. Super Turrican, which is a different game from its NES counterpart, followed the example set by Turrican 1 and 2, while Mega Turrican, which would also become Turrican 3 on the Amiga, experimented a little bit more. This episode will explore the latter. On a graphical level, the Amiga version is a little underwhelming in some areas. The level of detail is great, but the colors are pretty dull in comparison to the original Turrican, and especially Turrican 2. The Genesis version, on the other hand, looks gorgeous. There's even more detail than in its Amiga counterpart, and everything just looks so vibrant. Then there's the music. You've probably heard me go on and on about the series' tendency of having really elaborately composed soundtracks. On terms of song structure, the songs in Turrican 3 are rarely ever as complex as the songs in previous entries. There are a couple of exceptions, like the intro theme in the Amiga version and Bionic Action, but for the most part the songs are structured more like what was conventional in video game music at the time. Does that make it bad? No, far from it. It's still Chris Hulsbeck, and it's still simply awesome. Okay, so how about the gameplay? Is it as good as Turrican 2? Well, even though I'm a huge Factor 5 fan, I'll be the first to admit it. While Factor 5 has released a surprising amount of games that not only hit the bullseye, but hit it so hard that leaves you absolutely speechless, they've also released a lot of games where they have a great opportunity to make an artistic masterpiece, but don't take advantage of it as much in comparison to their other works. Well, I do think that this game is great. It falls into the latter category. Like I said earlier, the game is a bit different than the Turrican games preceding it. The gameplay mechanics themselves have been modified with a more conventional health meter and even more conventional jump controls. The level design itself combines the Turrican style of level design with the more standard, linear, and in my personal opinion, boring Japanese style. Thankfully, the exploration element is still there, but it's just not as big a part of the game as it was in Turrican 2. With all of these changes taken into account, you really get the sense that this is more of a crowd pleaser than a risk-taking artistic vision like the other games were. Then we have the almost met opportunity itself, the plasma rope. A lot of the game has you using the plasma rope in several different ways to make your way through obstacles, explore, and otherwise interact with your environments. Many Turrican fans hate the plasma rope, but to be honest, I think the game would have been stronger if we saw more of it. They could have pulled off a Portal or Gianna's Sister's Twisted Dreams with this, where the applications of this tool become progressively more intricate as the game progresses. The first world does this quite well, and the last world, while a little frustrating, pulls it off really well. It's just almost everything else in between that doesn't. Or at least enough to make it a complete triumph of game design. A majority of the second world is entirely linear, so while the plasma rope itself ties into the platforming quite nicely, it doesn't leave you with too many possibilities as far as exploration goes. The Junkyard world doesn't give you a whole lot of opportunities to use the rope either. The Alien world uses it alright, but out of all of the Turrican games to have an Alien world, I just don't see why it's here. Seeing how logical level progression is a huge part of the Turrican games, and was handled well in the game up to this point, it just seems odd to see a world like this kind of come out of nowhere. With all that complaining out of the way, what do I like? There is quite a lot, actually. While the Amiga version is a little slow for my taste, the Genesis version is on crack, in a good way. You're being put into these insane situations with very good execution. I love games that make me feel like I'm being flung from one crazy scenario to another, and this is one of those games. The platforming is very fun, and the exploration, when it's there, is a lot of fun too. Even in some of the smaller areas, I spend a good amount of time just exploring every nook and cranny, and that can be very rewarding to do. While the application of the plasma rope isn't necessarily artistically strong enough to call the game a masterpiece in my mind, it still has its strong points and manages to give the game some depth, as well as keep the game engaging throughout its duration. So if you're looking for a crazy, fun, fast-paced action-adventure platform game that does have a brain to it, then I definitely give this a recommendation. I've played around with the Genesis library of games, and with everything I've played, this still remains one of my favorite games on the system, and I have a feeling that it always will be.